So as always, there are a few preliminaries. This is repeat for those of you who have been here, but for those just coming in, want to cover these important starters. First, once again, the series is dedicated to David Lipsky, Professor and Dean Emeritus of Cornell University's ILR School, also past president of the National LIRA, and David is a friend, colleague, and mentor to many within our field. As was stated earlier, Professor Lipsky's work has and continues to shape and advance our understanding of negotiation and conflict resolution. And we recognize and thank him for his many contributions to our field through this dedication today. And then also, we are honoring the memory of a friend and colleague, arbitrator Marcia Greenbaum from the Boston area. Marcia was also a leader and educator in the field of dispute resolution. She served in many roles, but we are noting here the president of the Society of Professionals in Dispute Resolution, SPIDER, and she received the LIRA Lifetime Achievement Award. Marcia would have loved this series, and she would have been actively participating if I could imagine that. She would be here. And she was a mentor to many, which is what, the spirit of this session, these sessions really is about. So we recognize her and remember her today. So a few logistics about the panel today. Again, this is designed to be conversational, not a presentation. So the panelists will all be appearing together. We want to include you, but we can't accommodate a live Q&A format, but we will engage you. We're going to have a couple of polls and we're going to be addressing your questions through chat. Same as last time. I'm joined by Tom Melancon, my friend and co-moderator here, who'll be monitoring the chat box for your questions. We can take those as we go, or we can save them for the end. We'll sort of evaluate that as we're going through, but that's going to be your way to connect to the panelists. And again, after the session, they've generously agreed to stick around for 15 minutes in breakout rooms before the session on ombuds, and you can ask them questions in a smaller group setting if that's more comfortable. So we do ask you to stay muted throughout the program. Again, we're being recorded, just so you know, and we will end on time after 60 minutes. The next session will begin after a 15-minute break. That's going to be 11:30 on my side of the world, 2:30 on the east side of the US, and other time zones. Because I guess we may have people from around the globe here today. So let's get started. I'm super pleased to introduce to you this international panel of dispute resolution all-stars, here to talk today about the future of mediation, again with the focus on dispute resolution design. In this session, panelists consider how workplace conflict may be changing, again, looking out 10 to 15 years from now, and contemplate what innovations in dispute resolution processes may be needed to fully and effectively address and resolve workplace conflict. Each of the panelists brings a unique perspective to this question, informed by the different types of work that they do. So we will get into it. Here, first, just me and Tom. I'm the state conciliator with the Oregon Employment Relations Board, and Tom is here based in Seattle with FMCS. He's a strategy officer.
Glad to be here.
And Tom and I are both practice leaders within the LIRA dispute resolution intersection. Okay. So now my pleasure to introduce the panel. Susan Stewart joins us today from Toronto, where she has an arbitration and mediation practice. Susan is a highly experienced and sought after arbitrator and mediator, and a proven leader within the field of workplace dispute resolution. She is currently the president of the Ontario Labor Management Arbitrators Association and president-elect of the National Academy of Arbitrators. So we're very, very fortunate and pleased to have Susan here today. Jennifer Pernfuss is also a Canadian based in Toronto, and super happy to have Jennifer here. Jennifer is the principal and founder of respect, conciliation, and education. This is a business dedicated to helping workplaces and employees deal with internal complaints and relationship issues. Jennifer is a trained attorney and mediator who has focused her career on the prevention and resolution of workplace discrimination, harassment, and conflict. Over the course of her career, Jennifer has evolved an approach to workplace conflict that centers on prevention and reparative dispute resolution processes. She describes herself not as a mediator, but as an organization and relationship systems coach and consultant. And she'll be talking more about that because how she describes her work is how she sort of landed where she is an important part of understanding the work that she does. And then we have Peter Swanson from the FMCS. Pete is the director of the Office of Conflict Management and Prevention for the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service. He's based in DC. In his role, Pete mediates and facilitates workplace conflict. He facilitates senior executive leadership programs and culture change efforts. He provides executive coaching services to senior leaders. He designs and delivers training in leadership, negotiation, mediation, and facilitation. And Pete really works at the intersections of conflict resolution, leadership development, coaching, organizational development, and education to provide systemic and holistic approaches to client challenges. So we are, again, so lucky to have Pete and all of these panelists to talk to us about this important topic. So as I've alluded to, these three panelists will really be focusing on three separate processes. While there's some overlap in all of them, they're going to put a lens on this question from their unique vantage points. Med-arb process with Susan Stewart. We're going to hear that this is a much more widely utilized approach in Canada, and it will be great to get some insights from Susan as someone who employs this approach regularly. Reparative dispute resolution, again, from Jennifer, and then Pete kind of talking about this question of mediation process from the lens of working with parties through leadership coaching, working with their mindset. So we've asked the panel to consider first what they do. So I think we're going to have a one round of talking, just allowing them to describe their work a bit, because it may be different or need to explain it in order to understand their perspective. And then they're going to come back and weigh in on what their current experience tells us about the future challenges and what workplace dispute resolution practitioners really should be thinking about developing and bringing to the table to meet tomorrow's challenges. So with that, arbitrator and mediator Susan Stewart, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Jan, and thank you for the opportunity to be present here today and to make a contribution to this important endeavor. I feel particularly privileged to be part of a session that honors Marcia Greenbaum. She was, of course, a well-loved member of the National Academy and is deeply missed. And you're absolutely right, Janet. Had she been able to, she would be an active participant here today, always with intelligence and wisdom. So as Janet indicated, I'm an arbitrator and mediator in Ontario. And what I do primarily, like most of my colleagues, is med-arb or med-arb, as some people call it. And it has become accepted as the standard way to resolve grievances, whether individual grievances or groups of grievances. And in fact, in Ontario, it's endorsed by statute. So there is that protection, the recognition that a matter can commence by arbitration, but it can proceed to arbitration. I know that everyone's not comfortable with the process. I know that from discussions with my arbitrator colleagues in the United States and certainly within other provinces in Canada. And there was a bit of an evolution, the development of comfort in my primary jurisdiction, Ontario. But I thought it would be interesting at the very beginning to gauge the level of comfort with med-arb with the poll. So Janet's going to do that right now. And so the question is whether med-arb is an appropriate method of dispute resolution. You have 3 options. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Or I don't know. So if you could very quickly respond to those questions, or respond to the question with one of the 3 alternatives.
The answers are coming in fast and furious. We've got almost half of the room voting, having voted. We'll give it another minute, another few seconds to get everybody in there. Do you want to make a prediction, Susan?
No. If it were Ontario, the answer would be yes, 99%.
Well,
Broader audience.
maybe we are becoming more like our northern neighbors. I'm going to end it. It looks like it's slowing down at about 65%.
So interesting, a little more than I predicted. 63% think that it is an appropriate method of dispute resolution. 8% no, absolutely not, and 29% are uncertain. As I said, it has come to be widely accepted in Ontario, but it has been a bit of an evolution. 20 years ago, when I started to practice in the area, mediation and arbitration were seen as separate processes. So a matter would go to mediation. If it didn't settle, it would proceed to arbitration. And of course, there was the understandable concern about the apprehension of bias on the part of the arbitrator if the mediation was unsuccessful, particularly in instances where there was a case assessment, which is, of course, commonly a part of many mediations. So they would take place different days between different neutrals. There'd be the time lapse, and there'd also be the double expense, of course. So one of the things that precipitated the change in Ontario and the general acceptance was a very large backlog that had developed for parties, a government employer, with many ministries in one of its unions. And they were very, very motivated to put the backlog behind them and were prepared to put considerable resources into doing so, but they didn't want to have one day of mediation, one day of arbitration, and they really wanted solutions. They were focused on solutions for past issues, and it was very successful. The parties were very, very happy with the outcome. People felt like they had their day. They used people who they felt very confident in, very experienced arbitrators primarily then, who became mediators through the process, and great success. It's the norm in Ontario. And of course, the strengths are that the one day, the resources are more limited, more likely to get an answer. There are a number of protocols that have been developed, one that I'm particularly well acquainted with in the corrections institution, where certainly answers are very important. They're important everywhere, but I think that it's the case both north and south of the border that labor relations in corrections institutions are typically tense, and so answers are required. So one of the things that happens if it doesn't take place in one day, the case is managed so that coming out of the mediation exercise, there may be agreement on facts, streamlining of the evidence, arrangements for will-say statements, all things that will make the next stage expeditious and effective. So that's basically what I do every day. Now from my desk. I used to do it across the province, and I guess I still do, but virtually. So that's really what I wanted to say as a bit of an introduction.
Okay, thanks for that description, Susan. Jennifer, let's talk a little bit about what your work involves.
Thank you, Janet. And I feel so grateful for the invitation to be part of this very important and timely conversation about the future of ADR in our organizations where we're spending most of our time. So Janet, as you mentioned, I'm legally trained, and I call myself a restoration practitioner. And I'm contacted by organizations to help them effectively resolve workplace harassment and discrimination complaints. I have to say that I'm always very excited when I get a call from an employer before there's been a formal complaint, because at that point in time in the conflict, there's an opportunity, a big opportunity, to develop a well thought out strategy for how to respond to the issue, to intervene at a low level, having regard for all of the stakeholders. So when in that role, I think of myself as like a strategist. Unfortunately, I'm usually called post-investigation when relationships are damaged, when there's low levels of trust. And in that role, I'm picking up the pieces with the employer to try and create something new from that conflict. And I take an unusual approach to this work, and it's really a systems-inspired approach. So as a strategist, when I'm told about the situation, I really take a balcony view of the system in which the issue is arising. And it might be within a team, a department, or even an organization in its entirety. So to give you an example, let's say a staff member at a school is accusing a principal of sexual harassment. So I would look at that school as a whole, and from this balcony view, identify the various interests at play and look to see what might be needed in terms of a response. And it's always with a view to resolution down the road. If there is a complaint between or an issue between a complainant and a respondent, instead of mediating between the two of them, I am a trained mediator. But as a systems coach, what I'm doing is I'm coaching their relationship, which is like the third entity. So there's the complainant, the respondent, and then the relationship. If there's conflict within a team, I'm coaching the team as a system. And we stand in this perspective that wherever there is conflict, it is simply a signal that something wants or needs to change. And we are leaning into that system that is, it's really getting close to what's wanting to emerge out of that. It's a very different orientation. We also believe that in any system, in any conflict, the system itself actually holds the seed to its resolution. We also embrace as systems coaches the importance of deep democracy. That is recognizing all voices in the system matter. And in fact, we can't get a clear snapshot of what's happening until we hear from all of the voices. And it is through giving space for them to express themselves that we can reach effective, meaningful, and sustainable resolution. So all that to say, this is an innovative approach to resolving workplace conflicts that I'm happy to say is really resonating with stakeholders and getting positive results.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Very interesting work you do. Pete?
Hey, thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Good day to everybody, and certainly to acknowledge Dave Lipsky. I don't know where Dave is. I think he's retired these days. I don't know if he's on here, but I had a wonderful time working with Dave years and years ago, and I've always just looked up to him so much. So it's very kind that this is in honor of Dave, and I miss him. So wherever you are, Dave, I hope all is well for you. So you know, I could talk about my approach, and you could put Jennifer's face in front of me, and it would probably be pretty much overlapping the same kind of thing, but I'll try to use my own words about it. So I run the Office of Conflict Management and Prevention at the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service. I've done that for a little over 2 years. I actually started that office nearly 32 years ago when I first was at FMCS, and I stayed there for about 12 years, and I left, and I took a 18 or 19 year sabbatical and came back when I was asked to lead that office. And one of the things that I had the opportunity to do when I had my own firm was to get involved with the intelligence community in leadership development, which is when they asked me to do it, I said, I don't know anything about leadership development. I don't know if I'm the appropriate person to be asking to do this. And they said, we don't need you to be an expert in it. What we want is your facilitation ability to come in and help them on their journey. And that started probably a 15-year journey, in addition to the other work that I was doing, into deep dive around leadership and its impact on systems and on workplaces. And as I started diving into it, and I started working with middle managers, and then by the time I was done, I was working with senior executives all over the intelligence community, and then was being brought in to do the work that Jennifer's doing, a lot of the systemic work around workplaces that are not functioning very well. It really struck me the impact of and the quality of leadership, how it affects the workforce and the workplace. And principally, what guides my work is I look at mediation. You know, mediation is a very formalized structure. And it's not I'm not putting any negatives around it. It is a transactional process. You come out of it with a settlement, hopefully. That's what you're aiming for. But you can mediate the same issue in 100 different disputes for an organization and not at all touch the problem for why it's happening in the first place. And as I started looking at this and working in fields such as the leadership development and coaching, it really struck me that we are not looking at these areas as we think about ourselves as dispute resolvers. And Jennifer was saying she doesn't call herself a mediator at all. And I think that that's one of the places we certainly start with, is how do we think of ourselves and our own abilities and the roles that we would play. And so to me, I look at it from a systemic lens, but the systems maybe that I'm thinking of, right, are what are the structures and the rules and the policies. That's one level of a system that certainly we engage in. But the other are the systems of mindsets, the assumptions, the mental models that people hold each other to and hold each other accountable to, which are often at the root of all the kinds of issues that Susan or Jennifer are brought in to address in the first place. But it's as a result of the fact they've never had conversations about these things. They've never had the right conversations or the ability to talk about them, right? And so what you inevitably have in all this is a leader who has an impact largely because they hold a position of authority and they don't know how to use that position of authority. So they are not self-aware. But on the other side, because I don't want to put it all on leadership, is you have the employee who has a victim mentality. Again, I'm stereotyping, but that's not the intent. The idea is to say on the other side, there's a lack of self-awareness too, and the ability to step in and up and confidence to speak for themselves, and that they are actually much more powerful than they think they are. So it's kind of two sides of the same coin to work with. So that's how I try to look at it from my perspective as a practitioner and mentoring my staff through these things.
Okay, thank you. Wow, 3 backgrounds here are going to provide for a really interesting next round of conversation. So the next question really is maybe twofold. What do you see on the horizon in terms of workplace conflict? Is there anything new under the sun? Is workplace conflict evolving? Is it changing, or are we potentially just looking at it in different ways? And then from your lens, what is needed? What approaches, what processes in dispute resolution should we be continuing to apply or to be thinking about or evolving as we look down that road? And again, you each have your own way of looking at that. So Susan, can we put it back to you?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Janet. So in terms of what's coming in our immediate future is that we're going to be in a post-COVID world. And it's going to be a very different world in terms of the workplace. There are going to be economic factors in play that are going to have implications for employers and, from my perspective, their unions. I think that we're going to have to be flexible. We're going to have to use some of the tools that were probably identified in the last session that unfortunately I was unable to attend, but I think that there are going to be ways that we can work better, more efficiently. The other thing that's on the horizon, emerging issues, are issues of racial equality and sexual harassment. Jennifer referred to some of those issues, and those are certainly matters that are devastating both to individuals and organizations, and they're in the workplace. They have been for many years. They're certainly coming to a head, and people are looking for resolutions of those issues. I just think we always have to think about how we can be better, how we can innovate, both through techniques and maybe even partnerships. And I thought about that in connection with some of the things that I had the privilege of hearing Jennifer and Pete say in our preparation sessions. And the kind of work that I do is the immediate grievance has been filed, needs to be resolved. What are we going to do, Susan? And my innovation has been, well, med-arb, mediation, but there certainly are systemic issues that may need a broader perspective that people like Jennifer and Pete can bring. So, I think maybe there's potential for partnerships. The other thing that I think about, and this is particularly something we've been thinking about in Canada, is the narrowness of our perspectives. I'm a lawyer, and I come from a place of legal training and an adversarial system. That's what I'm used to. That's what I've grown up in, operate in. But there's certainly other ways of looking at things, and there's been a bit of a renaissance in Canada, recognition of Indigenous culture, and that this is the only way that disputes are resolved, the way that we've done it. There are other ways, and I think we have lots to learn from different methods of dispute resolution. So that's my crystal ball gazing.
Interesting. Do you see any evolution in the med-arb process, or that it's spreading in terms of its use?
Well, it's certainly dominant in Ontario, and there's not much space to go. I would think it has potential, I think, to be more widespread throughout Canada, but it's really a matter of choice. Now, in my jurisdiction, people know what mediation is, they know what arbitration is, they know what a med-arb is, and so they choose. And there are certainly instances too where people will say, we want an arbitration, Susan. We don't want to spin our wheels. We've talked, or maybe we've even been to mediation elsewhere. We need a decision, and let's get going on that right now. So that's really what
okay.
Response.
Okay, thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
And Jennifer, let's come back around to you with this futuristic look.
Yeah, so, Susan, when we were preparing, by the time it gets to you, there's been a lot of injury to all of the parties. And it's a tough spot to be in at that point in terms of repair, although there's value in decisions being made and sometimes discipline being meted out. You're quite right about, where we come from traditionally is this legal mindset, and our organizations are dictated by policy and procedure. And what I'm seeing is we can get quite comfortable there because it's what we know how to do. And it is it's a complaint-driven process. So the onus really traditionally has been, if there's an employee who feels mistreated, is not having a satisfying experience, they can then raise a complaint through the policy and procedure. Peter, what I love about what you're saying is I pause at that point and I say, let's rethink that, because if the leadership is provided the tools and the awareness, the skills and the permission, quite arguably it's their legal obligation, that where they see behaviors, microaggressions, incivilities that are tearing at the working relationships, they can effectively intervene and do course correction really early on. So I see that as a real, an area to build out capacity for leaders. By the time a complainant has raised a concern and is endeavoring to establish a prima facie case, which will inevitably trigger the procedures, they are far along in feeling injured and mistreated. And so the relationship is often quite severed at that point, and restoration is made very difficult. Then what we in Canada and in some provinces, we're legally required, if a prima facie case is established, is to conduct a formal investigation. I'm a retired investigator. While they play a role and they are important, they also are quite flawed. They're adversarial in nature. They inherently attribute blame. They endeavor to find the truth. And as a systems coach working in the realm of relationship, there's no such thing as the truth. There's your truth and my truth. So I think that we really need to reimagine how we're approaching these complaints, and then the expectation that once a decision is rendered and an outcome is communicated to all of the parties involved, almost always they're dissatisfied. In fact, we could maybe, Janet, could we do that, the poll?
Sure.
I'd be interested in people's feedback and their experience around this. So the question is, in your experience, how effective are the processes that you've been using in your organization, for example, investigations and mediation, to resolve harassment complaints? Extremely effective, effective, somewhat effective, not effective at all. They actually cause harm.
So votes are coming in quickly. We're almost at 50%. Give people a little bit more time here. Okay, the response rate is slowing down. I think we're going to land at about 64% responding. So we'll just end it there. See that we have a bit of a bill.
Interesting. So I'm really pleased to see that some are extremely effective. That's very hopeful. And it's kind of in the middle, somewhat effective. So all that, that demonstrates that there's room to grow and reimagine. And I think that there's an opportunity when these issues arise to pause. We are quick to fall into policy and procedure because it's what we know how to do, like investigations or even mediation. And to take that balcony view and look at the impact that this conflict is having on all of the stakeholders. That would include what's the legal obligation, respondents, complainants, the witnesses, other departments. It might even be in smaller communities. If there's an issue in the workplace, it can have an impact on relationships outside of the workplace. So it's this, as I say, this balcony view to design the approach, which in some cases can involve mediation and many other resources, how to support them to move through the conflict to an effective resolution.
Jennifer, do you think there may be a growing expectation for this kind of approach as people are, workplace conflict is going to be with us? I don't know if you would comment on any changing aspects of the nature of conflict. Maybe it's a changing set of expectations about how we resolve it.
I think that the sentiment, at least in Canada, is that the processes that we are using are leaving people dissatisfied. And also, particularly post-investigation, it is so broken by then. So much injury has occurred, it's very difficult to restore those relationships. So I think that there's dissatisfaction at an employee level. There's also dissatisfaction with HR and legal and other stakeholders endeavoring to resolve these issues. And they're quite hungry for a reimagined way of addressing this.
Okay, interesting. Thank you so much. And let's turn to Pete now, as you kind of reflect on what the future opportunities and challenges are and what we need to be thinking about bringing into our next decade.
So I would agree with everything that Susan and Jennifer are saying, and I get really just zeroed in and fascinated on what they're saying. And one thing I'd start off with is both of them have said these things are going to keep coming, right? They're just going to keep coming at us. I think the first, where my mind first went when you asked the question is, so what's the context? And of course, every generation has its own context for how these arise. And in ours, you know, if we look back just a few years, you could start things off with the Me Too movement, right? And then on top of that, at least in the United States, then you add a new administration coming on which had a huge impact socially in our world. And then over COVID and last year with George Floyd, all of a sudden, you know, the world is a different place, and the conversations that we have now are very different in nature than they were 5 or 6 years ago. Even things that were not really brought up are now being brought up more openly. People are more comfortable in expressing them. They've been given permission to express them in ways that you know, when you think about the context, that those of us who are out here trying to practice in this world of whatever we call it, conflict management, prevention, restoration, connecting people in a positive way, we have to be prepared to deal with this and have this number of tools in an ever-changing environment. And so as I kind of crystal ball things, I still go back to what Jennifer said, which is how she defines herself in the first place. And, you know, if we have that mindset that I'm a mediator and I'm here to get an agreement, then you'll do that. And that's great. If you're good, you'll be able to do that. But if you see yourself differently, if all of us see ourselves differently and as more 360-degree service providers, then I think we can move to the heart of issues and to really not just put a Band-Aid on things, but to hopefully make some impact deeply into places that have the ability for healing, right? And so as I look at it, one of the things we're trying to do at FMCS, we've just started this in the past spring, was introducing this new cohort of mediators who had to be they volunteered, they had to apply for it, but it's called the Conflict Management Professional Cohort. And it's a 2-year program that we're taking them through, which is designed to be the future service provider, conflict management professional of the future. What are they going to be looking like in 2030? And that particular, so instead of just mediation, they have to have mastered that going in, but it is really, they meet for a week per quarter for 2 years, and they study different areas such as leadership development and culture. How does that play into things? We look at change management, and we look at that from several different angles, and what are systems and what is culture change. We spend 2 of the quarters on coaching training so that they get coach training to a baseline ICF, International Coaching Federation certification. We look at them also in terms of how do you handle large, we also have to do large issue, you know, public issues, public policy issues. We're asked now to do a whole lot of listening sessions around race. So how are you sensitive to doing that and dealing with large groups? So we're trying to take the strategic view as an agency of what are the real 360-degree services that we need to bring. And it's an exciting time to be a part of it.
Yeah, wow. Thanks for bringing all that detail into imagining the very specific ways in which there is professional development going on around meeting these challenges. Tom, what's happening over there in the chat box? Oh,
I was just getting ready to send a message to all of the participants in the chat box, but you can go ahead and start posting your questions for the panelists in the chat. And if you have a specific panelist you want to direct it to, let us know that, or if you'd like all three of them to address that, then we'll do that. And I will attempt to get those messages to the panelists, either through the chat or I'll call them out sometimes verbally. So let's see what we have.
Some comments.
All right, there's the post. So go ahead and start posting your questions, and don't want to have dead time here, Janet.
So
maybe
here's
we should go
one.
back.
Here's, you see the one there about traditional law. Jennifer, you can see that one. Do you want to take that on? The question is, how relevant is traditional law school licensure to this work? Do you think attorneys are the best people to be doing this type of work?
Great.
Was that too? You want me to speak to that?
Sure.
Okay.
Anyone.
So, legal training certainly helps because we're operating within a system and an organization that is bound by legal rights and obligations. So it does inform. I don't know that it's absolutely necessary. I don't know, Susan, as a lawyer, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I share your view that it's a very valuable education for me, and it gives you certain analytical skills. Certainly, there are many people who do my work who didn't have to go to law school, is the way I look at them. They are able to do it without that certification. But, I think that it may be limiting. And now that I have the floor, I have a very pressing question for you, Jennifer. And as a fact finder, I guess, how do you do what you do? How do you find your facts? You said that with respect to an investigation, it's too late for you to come in, or it's more challenging. So I hope I'm not usurping the
Oh,
process.
no, please.
That's a
This is
pressing
great.
question that I have.
Yes.
How do you get to what happened? Or
Yeah, so typically if it's post-investigation, there's a report, a decision's been rendered by the investigator, and I just kind of push that aside because in this work, you meet your system where it is. So let's assume there hasn't been an investigation. I typically will do an intake right now virtually with each individual, and I'm listening for their narrative, their story. But I'm also getting them prepared for the systems coaching. So what's different, the systems coaching is different from mediation, is there's the ventilation part, which happens in mediation as well. But there's also getting alignment on desired outcome, where people want to land, and then educating and imparting tools and skills to help those parties navigate the relational choppy waters in which they've lived for a certain amount of time. They're in conflict. So it's not just agreement or desired outcomes, but it's also providing them information about their system and then layering in skills and tools.
Thanks, Jennifer. There's another question that's in the chat, and it's that this is to you, Jennifer, are there specific trainings or techniques that you recommend for those looking to practice more restorative practices?
Yes, so this is the big shout out to CRR Global in California. I'm a certified organization and relationship systems coach. It's fabulous, phenomenal training. I have at my disposal now 34 tools to call upon in any dispute that I'm working with. It's excellent training.
Can I,
Great.
can I
Go ahead, Pete.
Can I make a comment on this? Because I think Jennifer raises an interesting point that isn't really often appreciated in the field. And that is, the intent of mediation is agreement, and the intent of coaching is change, right? And so they're not the same thing. They share a lot in terms of different approaches and techniques and things that you can do, but the fundamental differences there, I think, are important to understand and for us to be able to work with, because if you're gonna get an agreement, yeah, you'll get that agreement for that issue. But if you're trying to change if you're trying to have an impact on a workplace that's experiencing severe pain, that's a behavioral change. And it's been proven that training doesn't scratch that itch, right? You're going to get maybe 25%, retention after a year from training. But if you marry that with coaching, you can get up to 80 or 90% retention, because coaching is consistent and it's around change itself. It's not around agreement. So bringing and wielding these processes together, education, the training, the mediation, and making it into a real symphony is, I think, an important thing for us to consider.
Great. The questions are coming in. If I can just, Jennifer, go ahead. I didn't want to cut you off.
I just want to pick up a thread here. This is why these conversations are so valuable. So, you know, Susan, when I think about you rendering a decision, and it might be a return to work. So this situation doesn't justify termination, that respondent has to go back into the workplace. This systems approach, this coaching approach, you can look at it thinking about and anticipating, well, there's a complainant out there who's been traumatized by whatever's happened, and put to the employer, how are you going to, or what resources are you going to call upon to help with a successful reintegration, keeping in mind all of the experiences at play, and putting that to the employer to take that challenge on, because a simple reintegration back doesn't work.
Great. Just wanted to ask another question of the panelists that's been put in the chat. When taking a systems approach, what data do you collect and use to help leaders make the best informed decisions?
Data, can I have some examples? Like, are we tracking what we're doing as systems coaches in terms of resolving issues? I am not. I have anecdotal data available to me, but not researched.
All right. Anything, Pete, you have on that? I mean, and it's.
I think that is an excellent question. I really do. And we could spend hours talking about it, right? Because the first thing from my perspective is we have to have agreement on what the word system is when we're talking with a client, right? What is their view of what a system is and what its components are? And what is our view of the system and what its components are? And what are the critical pieces that are really at play that we have to be looking at? Again, like the policies, the structures, the procedures, and then you have to look at the culture. You know, the culture piece is the code that runs the organization. It's that unspoken part of what it takes to be successful or not successful, or how we deal with our external environment. And so what are the key pieces and parts of that we need to get data on, and how do we need to do that? So the answer could be I can't give you a straight or a pat answer for that. What I can do is to say that we would certainly want to construct some kind of assessment tool or tools that get to the heart of the things that matter, of what resonates and they are measuring, so to speak, and has impact on them.
Great. Another question I just wanted to point out that Dick Venture put in there, and I'm sorry, Jennifer, feel free. I don't want to cut you off. You know, we have a few. There was a progressive movement towards integrative conflict management systems, and then the movement seems to have shifted more towards mandatory arbitration as company policy. Any thoughts about why that's happening and if those trends are changing?
I don't know that I see it that way. I know that the integrated dispute systems design was, the idea of it was more popular years back. You would hear more about it, but I don't think it's gone away. I'm, you know, just in this conversation alone, it's very clear that approach resonates, and practitioners are doing this. And they're looking at it from a systemic level. So at least the practitioners are thinking of this and are helping organizations try to address it. And I think if you actually look at some of the examples of like the Fortune 100 companies that are out there, you'll find they have some pretty sophisticated systems that are out there that have soup to nuts ways of handling and addressing issues. It's more the less resource rich companies don't have that capability of doing it. If you go down, is my understanding of the research in this, but it's a fantastic question.
Okay. we're kind of getting some comments in the chat. Not sure they're necessarily questions, but I'm just going to give it back to the panelists and say, do
Susan?
you have any other thoughts?
Yeah. Susan, you looked like you were leaning in.
Yes, I was just looking at the question about fear of acting that was in the chat, and I wanted to respond a bit to that. And, you know, I think that you've seen a transformation in terms of issues of race and what has happened, why there's no fear, or, well, whether there's less fear. Now, I'm not suggesting that these problems have been miraculously solved, but at the highest levels of leadership in many organizations, the ultimate leader is saying, we're going to have a plan with respect to issues of diversity and equity. And this doesn't happen in my organization anymore. Sexual harassment does not happen in my organization anymore. And it comes from the very top. So that's what has to happen. That's what managers need to push upward in terms of the highest level of management, and management needs to do that. So
Okay,
that was
another
comment that I wanted to make.
Okay.
Thank you. Jennifer, Pete, I have another kind of question or statement that I wanted to just throw out, unless you have anything else to share at this point. It's in the chat. Speaking of definitions, I think if we widen mediation to include narrative mediation, then we'd find that practitioners have been thinking about more holistic services and change. Any comments or anything, reflections upon that?
Well, so I know for me, it might be how I get kind of hooked by mediation and what it means. Because it's broadening it out. And as to Pete's point, not about agreement, but rather alignment on desired outcome. And taking into account in the process, not just what's happening between the parties. That is a nested relationship that lives in a bigger system. So getting curious about how is that system supporting what is happening within the dynamic of that relationship. Mediation, and this may be my way of looking at it, seems narrow because it's focusing on the disputants rather than this broader view. And taking into account even this idea of time spirits, if you'll indulge some of the coaching lingo around the idea like racism and sexism and ageism, the isms live in all of our systems to a greater or lesser degree and are at play to a greater or lesser degree and need to be taken into account as we work through issues because they live in the system.
So can I offer a view in that? I loved that point that you made, Joey. And I don't disagree with you at all that narrative mediation, you know, you are going to a lot of what we're talking about that is beyond just an agreement to the heart of the matter. What I will say is this is something they don't teach you in mediator school, right? But you learn the hard way, which is that if you go into a mediation and you do the ground rules and you set everything up and you do your opening, and parties have worked with mediators before, and you do something that crosses the line with them, you could be unacceptable. But what's happened is they're expecting a mediator based on what they had before, and you're mediating based on what your model of mediation is, and you think you're doing everything right, and they think you've crossed a line. And so the one thing that is really important, I've learned, is for us to contract when we're entering into a process to say, let's talk about what you expect out of me and what you don't expect out of me and what I will and won't do and how I run this and how I might be speaking. Because if you've had experience before with mediators, I might be doing something that is very different than your experience is. So really, just, you know, it's getting those very fundamental definitions of what a mediation even means. Right, and what neutrality means, and what it means to when am I going to intervene, and what am I going to say, and when do I press a button? I'm going to let you know this is one of those sensitive times now. Here we go. You know, I find that really helps, but it's something that they never taught me to do up front.
Mm-hmm. I'm
Great.
gonna,
Wanted to have a comment too,
yeah,
very briefly. You know, I think that mediation can be transformative, right? And that's certainly the way that I try to practice it, using some of the skills that 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 Jennifer and Pete talk about. Not always the case, not every case calls for it, but certainly mediation can be, and med-arb can be as well. And of course, the beauty of med-arb is that you work with the parties, you work with them informally, you look for the issues, you look for the problems, the innate problems, not just perhaps what the grievance may say, and you do contract with them in terms of what they want you to do, but it can be transformative both in your role. You can say to them as the process goes on, and look what else you can do, and look what I can do, and perhaps look at the partners that that I can bring in. But at the end of the day, too, what you can do as an arbitrator is you can bring some certainty and finality to the situation, because I can say, and here's the decision about this whole thing, and this is how concretely we're going to move forward. So that was really the comment that I wanted to make.
Thanks, Susan. And that's you know, what I'm observing as I listen to the panel is just thinking about the different approaches that each of you take. And rather than sort of thinking about the right approach or the limits to an approach, I think, Susan, you got us started by talking about possibilities for collaboration or partnership across these different approaches to dispute resolution. And we are going to continue to meet the parties where they are with the skill sets that we have to meet the expectations and the sort of their expectations for the mechanisms to resolve disputes. I think it's important for us to continue raising questions about our approach and effectiveness, and are we meeting the needs? And yet we have our toolbox, but we also maybe have another toolbox that refers people to other systems, other dispute resolution processes, that there's a place where our practice begins and ends, but that's not the end of dispute resolution. And if we maybe are more familiar with what resources and options are available to parties, we can play a role and we can help them get to a place where others can help advance their interests, their needs, and their more complete resolution of conflict that they're experiencing. So I think there's a lot to be said in partnering and working together. So, whoops, it's 11:15. I said we would end on time. So maybe those are the closing remarks. I do want to thank the panel so much for enlightening us and really expanding our thinking about process design for conflict resolution. And again, in the interim, Susan and Jennifer and Pete will go into separate rooms to meet with individuals if you would like in the breakout rooms. But before we do that, I've just got to come back and do a few words of thanks. If you would just bear with me, this will take a second. I want to invite, first of all, everybody to join LIRA. This is a great professional community. If you're not a member, you're wanted and welcome, and you get a complimentary membership to the LIRA Dispute Resolution Intersection. And we've got members from all around the world, and invite you to join us. And then just want to thank people who made this, this series possible. Of course, starting with the chairs of the series, Dick Fincher and Mark Goff, who really were the architects and put this together and made it happen. Lots of great conversations have happened. Our publicity chair, Sabrina Dunsworth of the Oregon Herb, actually was instrumental in marketing and getting us a great turnout. And you know, Emily Smith, executive director of LIRA, and Bernadette Timon, marketing and membership coordinator, played just invaluable and critical roles in supporting this effort. So with everybody combined, we've put on some great programs, and thanks to you all for showing up, and our sponsors. We did this with the help of the NAA and the AAA and the ACR and a number of institutes of higher education. So thank you. We have one more wonderful panel coming up, and it actually came up in the chat a little bit, talking about the work of ombuds in organizations. And there may be really some parallels between the systems approach that we're talking about here and the work of ombuds in organizational work and dispute resolution. So we hope you'll stick around for that. And now, Bernadette, you want to help us figure out the breakout rooms?
All right, so the room should now be open. They are titled with the 3 speakers. If you don't know how to get to them, if you click on the breakout rooms at the bottom, then you should be able to scroll down to the bottom and join the room that you would like to have conversation in. If you have any trouble, just let us know.